Hello there, everybody, and welcome down to sunny Hove, near Brighton, to the house of the gorgeous house of Clare Southworth, and welcome to Talking Flutes this week with moi, Jean-Paul, and obviously...
Me. Yeah, thanks, Jean-Paul.
Clare, I haven't been down here for ages, have I?
No. We've done things via Zoom, but we haven't been face-to-face for a while.
We haven't. We've done things virtually. And the reason why you can probably hear an echo is, I'm just going to move my microphone closer to my mouth, is because she has very high ceilings. It's deadly posh. In fact, above me is this huge, great Bridgerton-type chandelier.
Yeah, we have chandeliers in all the rooms.
There's this chandelier in the kitchen.
It's an old Victorian house. Big windows, chandeliers.
It's so posh. So posh. Mind you, if anyone knows Brighton and Hove, Brighton is lovely, very eclectic. And as you walk down the front, you see a definite change from normality to poshness.
No, I wouldn't say normality, I say madness in Brighton to saneness in Hove.
Saneness in Hove. Anyway, quick shout out to our podcast sponsors, TJ Flutes. You can follow them on Instagram and Facebook at TJ Flutes and on the web at tjflutes.com. Clare, this week is an interesting one and one I just thrown at you. I was thinking the other day about motivation, because a big thing that you've always taught is about understanding your motivation and being motivated to do something. And I was looking, I was probably reading a book or listening to somebody. I don't know where the seed came from. But intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And I just thought, that's going to be an interesting podcast on, certainly to flute players and musicians. So I've thrown that at Clare. Neither of us know what we're going to speak about. So honesty, my lady. Full disclosure here. I've promised I'm going to be very open. And I think it might, well, for those who know me, probably won't surprise people what I'm going to say. And here we go, shall we?
Absolutely. Well, so you wrote and said to me, let's look at the subject of intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic. So I thought, first of all, what does it mean? Mm-hmm. I looked it up.
No, we have to, because it's a podcast.
So intrinsic motivation is a term used to describe the incentive we feel to complete a task simply because we find it interesting or enjoyable. Mm-hmm. And extrinsic motivation is what we feel when we complete a task for some external reward. So, simply put, you do it for the love of it, intrinsic, mm-hmm. or you do it to get a reward, extrinsic.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is going to be interesting, bearing in mind musicians, isn't it?
Yeah, because do you have to learn intrinsically in order to succeed? Or as you progress, do you then need rewards to succeed?
And that is the fundamental point, because I suppose as a professional musician, you have to have the rewards because you have to have the intrinsic link, because you need to be paid, you need to be booked, you need people to want to come and ask you to come and work. So there has to be that intrinsic link, doesn't there? But the causality surely starts way, way, way back.
Yeah, I mean, we're in terms of music, it's often a hobby that's become a job. When you start a hobby, you do it because it's enjoyable and interesting and you want to achieve something. I think we have to look at the role of the parent, the role of the teacher, and the role of the student.
Which one should we start with?
Look at the role of the parent.
Do you want me to go first?
Please do.
So I went to the music cupboard when I was at primary school, and all that was left was the flute. I wanted to play the drums or the French horn, but it wasn't there. It's just the flute. But to keep my mother happy, she had to see me or hear me practicing, because lessons were free in those days. But she thought it was important that I did this and I sort of practiced. So I would go upstairs and make noises and pretend that I was practicing to keep her happy. And then when I got a teacher, which was probably 3 months after I had this flute, and the classroom teacher, who was a woodwind player, a multi-woodwind player, was teaching me how to do it. When I then got a music teacher, in those early days, I was practicing to keep my mum happy, but also to begin to get praise from the teacher.
Okay.
So it started with my mother, keeping my mother happy and stop her moaning at me. And was it something I wanted to do? No. It wasn't cool, a guy that was 11, playing the flute.
No.
I wanted to be the drummer. But the motivation at that point was just to stop her moaning.
Interesting. Okay, well, I think certainly from a parental point of view, it's important to introduce the idea of learning. You're making the introduction. Young kids don't suddenly say, not normally, I want to play the flute. Although actually I have to say I did that because my parents wanted me to play the piano. And I said, anything but the piano. And they said, what? And I just that day had heard a flute down the road. And I said, flute, not knowing, anything about it at all. But parents need to encourage the fun aspect of learning, but definitely it's how you introduce it to your kids that's important. And then in terms of the learning aspect, you have to sort of encourage kids to learn, which is a more extrinsic, in order for them to discover the love of it, which becomes intrinsic.
Yeah. For me, I discovered the intrinsic really quickly.
Uh-huh.
And because in a world in the flute section dominated by girls, being the only geezer and the only guy that comes down, sitting at the back was a bit sort of not great on my street cred in the old symphonic band. So I started practicing quite hard because I quickly realised that playing fast was impressive to people. Mm-hmm. So I used to practice things to get the, wow, you can do that, or what's that? So all that extrinsic reward is nothing about the fundamentals of the way I was doing it. Mm. There was an intrinsic nature in that I was wanting to do it, but I was wanting to do it for the external reward, which was only that. That's
interesting. It's different for me because having really not wanting to play the piano, and then I said flute. And I think we mentioned in a previous podcast that the flute teacher was actually a clarinet player, and he'd turn up to the school in his raincoat and his suitcase with his clarinets and a flask of tea and tea cakes. And so we had a little chat each lesson, have a cup of tea and a tea cake. And then I would sort of teach myself from Tune a Day, Book 1. But I remember that he lent me a flute, the first flute, which was an old wooden Rudel card. And I just loved the feel of this flute and the sound, and everything about it made me happy. And then teaching myself also made me happy because he was just a nice old chap who we'd have a chat with each week. But for me, sort of teaching myself working through Tune a Day, Book 1, it made me really happy because it was like a different sort of communication. I was very quiet, so I didn't talk much. I like being quiet. I like being sort of by myself, quiet. But when I had my flute, I liked to play and to let people know, but not sort of knowingly, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much. So it's different to you. So my parents didn't have to get me to practice. And I think it was my initial curiosity about everything to do with the flute music that kept me going. And that's what happens with a lot of kids, I think, that learning comes from within them because of their curiosity and not because you've got a parent saying you've got to practice. As soon as you start saying you've got to practice, you don't want to practice. That's a really big problem. Now, I know encouragement is good, and sometimes you have the courage to say, look, why don't you go and play your flute for half an hour and then we'll do X. But it can get really difficult and it can create an awful lot of barriers between the parents and their children if you're having to make them do something. I'm more of a believer in introduce your kids to lots of different things and then see what appeals and what they start to love. And then that's the path you go down.
Where it became intrinsic for me, I need to speak into the microphone. When it became intrinsic was everybody at school hated scales. It was like the devil's work for students.
Wasn't fun.
No, and we didn't really understand. But I quickly cottoned on that if you practiced your scales, you could actually play quicker. And so James Galway came out with the Magic Flute album. Remember the albums?
Remember it well.
And Showpieces album.
Yeah, Showpiece is my favourite album of all time.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. And he was playing fast on it. Oh, he played slowly as well, but some fast stuff. And I cottoned on to the fact that some of that music was based, like things like Candle in Venice, some of it was just basic, the fast bits, was chordal work, arpeggio work, just playing fast. And that if I practice my scales and I practice my arpeggios, that started to fall under the fingers. That then, as I started playing that in an open space where people could hear me in the school hall, started becoming quite impressive. And I went from back to the front of the flute section. So I had some intrinsic motivation to do it because I was enjoying it. But it was all about the reward at the end.
Yeah.
And when I look nowadays at some of these wonderful, wonderful musicians that lead the field in what they do, in interpretation, and how they can really open up emotion, everything's come from an intrinsic source. They love what they do. They spend hours doing it in their own rooms, and only when they feel it ready does that ever come out. And it comes out purely because they want other people to enjoy, not for necessarily the adulation that comes from it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think what you're saying there is the progress changes that mindset to how you work. So progress makes you want to work more to improve more. And the opposite is true, that failing to improve stops that motivation. And it's a really tricky one. I think that for me, I played a lot of lovely, fun things to start off with. It wasn't until I had sort of more refined teaching, shall I say, that I realised there were other things you had to do in order to get better. I was just having a lovely time playing lots of lovely things. And then technique started to come into it, and technique became a bit more difficult because you had to really work at it. I remember getting it terribly wrong to start with because I would coast along during the week, playing really what I wanted to play. And then I always had a lesson on a Monday. Before my Monday lesson on a Sunday, I'd practice for hours. But all the things that I hadn't really wanted to do during the week before, and never really worked very, very well. And it wasn't really until I got to college that I realised that if I dedicated more time to the basic techniques, that I had such a lot more satisfaction in what I was doing because I got better a lot quicker. Your mindset changes as you get better. So you have to look at this point of whether you need intrinsic or extrinsic motivation according to the time of life you're in and the place you're in, whether you're just a kid just starting learning or you're trying to work to get into college or you're at college or you're professional or you're an adult learner.
When did you get that? Because I suppose if you have a passion or this passion is generated for the instrument, that obviously becomes intrinsic because you have something inside you that is wanting to develop and to learn more and to be inquisitive. That didn't start for me till I was probably 16. When did it start for you?
I don't know. I think you change your attitude when you realise you want to do it more seriously. And that then becomes extrinsic because I wanted to get into music college, and that the thought of that reward helped galvanise me into practising more because I really wanted it. But I enjoyed the work. So I'd always enjoyed playing my flute. My flute became like an escape. I moved from the north of England to the south of England for the last 3 years of my schooling. And I went from an all-girls convent grammar school where, you were ruled by the nuns and it was all very, very formal. But then moved for my last 3 years to a comprehensive school where it was a mixed ability, boys and girls. And I found it very, very difficult to fit in. And so I buried myself in my flute. My flute was my escape. And that's the reason I got into college. My reward was if I practiced a lot, I could escape from the school, but I could gain entry into music college and do what I loved all the time.
Now, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because when I started going to Jim Dower, the late Jim Dower, it's because I wanted to get into the Royal Academy and go and study with Wim. And Jim was always very straight with me and said, you know, you've got to be something special to get into the academy, and they don't just take anybody. You've got to be somebody that is almost a rough diamond, technically good, but that have something there, have something deep down within that can be explored by the flute professor. And then almost this Michelangelo marble just sort of smashed away, and then that player flowers. And when I went to my first sort of like pre-interview thing with Jim, I think I've told this in a previous podcast, he asked me what I was going to play, and I played the Ebert first movement, and his partner was playing the piano, and he finished, and he said, you know, how do you think that went? So I think that went really well. And then he said, well, if I was walking down the road, I wouldn't cross, and he heard you play that like that, I wouldn't cross over to see who you were. But for me at that time, I'm playing fast. You know, this is impressive. I wanted to impress this professor, this young professor. And I thought the way to do it was to play something really fast. And then when he said, no, play the middle movement, you know, make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, change the way that you focus your sound, make that sound different, make it hollow, make it rich, make me want to weep. And I didn't know how to do it, because I've been so used to wanting this reward, these people's eyes going, wow, like circular breathing. Wow, you can do that. Wow, that is greater than doing any Mozart or Bach study. I mean, that is just wow. And I think that was my first experience of thinking, goodness, there's something going on here.
No, it's Minnie the dog growling at you because she wants you to give her a stroke. She just wants attention.
which I'm doing now. But I never really understood the depths. So intrinsic motivation probably happened on that day when I suddenly understood that it's not about the reward of trying to impress someone. You've really got to feel it inside. And I didn't understand until years later what he actually meant about feeling inside, this emotion.
Yeah. And you have to do it for yourself. You cannot succeed if you're doing it for somebody else.
No.
It's got to come within you. So, you know, let's talk about the role of the teacher then, because a teacher really needs to find the balance between the motivation of intrinsic or extrinsic, and in the knowledge that, you know, the love of just doing it is what sustains you day in, day out, you know, week out. But you've got to still find create the right learning experience that you're being pushed, and so that you progress and develop. So it's finding the right repertoire, creating the right curriculum to keep the students curious and wanting to learn. And then by improving, that improvement encourages you to do more and more and more. Unfortunately, there are still teachers who teach through fear and intimidation.
Yes.
And so this is different because, you know, I think as a student, it's good to feel nervous before a lesson because you so want to show what you've achieved, but not nervous because of the attitude of the teacher. Yeah. So it's just a case of that nervous because you want to do well, not nervous because of what might be said. Because a good teacher should just create that right atmosphere that you just want to improve and progress. Doesn't matter where you want to go to. It's just each person has to be treated as an individual. So it doesn't matter if you're an adult learner or you're a 10-year-old kid. That environment and the role of the teacher is crucial to help the motivation.
Do you think the understanding of the student that trying to be perfect in what you are hoping to achieve in the end of your lesson on some work that you've been given puts the extrinsic before the intrinsic because they are wanting to please rather than working on the musicality and forgetting the fact that there is something greater than the teacher listening?
Yeah, it gets mixed up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really gets mixed up. And what starts as being an absolute love for playing your instrument and really having fun, and then suddenly becomes a little bit more serious, where you've got to practice in order to achieve that next bit of your development or the next stage of your playing life. So it all gets mixed up. And I think that you've got to accept as a student there are bumps along the road all the time, and progress is never smooth. And I think as you become more accomplished, you need to remind yourself about why you did this in the first place. So I think I've used this example before. It's a bit like if I suddenly said to someone, oh, we'd love you to come and do a recital in a year's time at, the Jean-Paul concert hall in Brighton. And you'd think, wow, that's fantastic. I'd love to. A flute recital would be fantastic. And then as it gets closer and you start to really having to work, and you start to have the little butterflies about doing it, and you start to almost fear the fact, am I going to be ready? Have I done enough work? Have I got the right program? You start to worry about it. That's the time you have to think, right, a year ago when I was offered this, the excitement, the energy, and the feeling so passionate about, that's really what I want to do. This is my, be a huge achievement. You have to remind yourself of that. So you've started off with the love of playing, and then someone offers you the carrot, say you want a recital, and that makes you work harder. And as that gets closer, you start to get fearful. And so then you have to remind yourself what it was that made you love it in the first place.
And not expect the outcome. I'm going to take you back quite a long time to a recital you did in the great St. John Smith Square in London. And the programme was so balanced.
It was all English.
It was all English. But it almost wasn't about you. It was about the music. And you played the world-premiered and Andy Scott piece, which is fiendishly complicated. But it was the music and your love of music and you wanting to promote English music, English flute music, that sort of came over. So it was all intrinsic that became extrinsic with the fact that you were wanting to bring all this to the audience, but it came from within. Your setup of that program was based around your love of what you were doing.
Yeah, I think that the reason that program came along is that there was an awful lot of English music that was ignored and not known. And also I wanted to promote the composers of today. So it was Andy Scott, Ian Clarke and Mike Mower.
Yeah.
And I did 2 first performances and 1 first English performance. I can't quite remember how it worked out, but there were 3 brand new pieces alongside traditional and well-known pieces. In fact, it was a program of traditional and non-traditional, basically. And I must say that as the thoughts around that program playing came to develop, I got more and more excited about that program. We just did it for the whole season, basically.
When you did the Ian Clarke's TRKs,
yeah,
that was totally about the music, because I'd never experienced something so hauntingly beautiful with backing.
Yeah.
And everything was about the music. It wasn't about you on the stage. So everything was intrinsic, wasn't it? You were developing from within.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose I was, yes.
You weren't trying to show off to the...
No, there were some pretty showy pieces because the Mike Mower and the Andy Scott piece was so difficult.
Yeah, but you had to have wanted to do that.
Yeah.
So the intrinsic nature had to be there. You weren't saying, I'm going to play something absolutely horrible because I want to show people how good I am. And this brings us on to probably more as a musician. As you develop, as you get older, do you become more comfortable in your skin? So therefore, everything is intrinsic.
Oh, heck. Jean-Paul, I don't know.
Look at jazz players. They're so laid back and they're not
it's
bothered.
a whole different
world. They're not bothered about some upstart coming and playing 1,000 miles. No, that's great, man. That's cool. They just seem to be happy in their own skin. Is that possible in the world that we inhabit?
I think when you get to a certain level, yes. I think when you stop worrying about what anyone else is doing. I mean, I did come to that point because all the way through growing up and learning an instrument, and when you want to take it further, it's always comparison with everybody else. And when you start your career, it's comparison because you're always having to do auditions to get further, to do more. You have to encourage people that you are the best person for the job, for that concert, whatever it is. And then after many years of fighting to be the best, you suddenly realise that actually you've arrived at wherever you want to be and you can relax a little bit more. You don't worry about, Joe Bloggs, who's also playing flute down the road, because you're happy in your own skin because you've arrived. You still have to work hard, but you don't have a fear factor. You have no more fear about anybody else stealing your work or gaining that audition, because you're not auditioning anymore. You're just working. So there comes a point when you can relax in a way because you've arrived. You still want to get better though. You always want to get better. So if you use the analogy of sport, sportsmen and women, they don't stop learning and developing. They're always trying to get better. You can always get better or learn something else. So that again is sort of extrinsic, that you have this sort of magnetic force that's drawing you to keep doing better and getting like getting personal bests in sport. Mm-hmm. There's always that pull going on all the time.
But in music, you need an extrinsic validation, don't you? You need the audience to applaud. You need people to be impressed. Look at what social media and online stuff is all about. It's about getting people to love what you're doing.
I think, unfortunately, social media has been harmful in so many ways, and that you don't now go to a concert and get wrapped up in the emotion of that performance because you've heard lots of other people do it on social media or recordings, and you forget that live music is something completely different, and that people do make mistakes. You don't always have the best acoustic, but you have to go there and get involved with that performer and sort of feel what they're communicating to you as the audience.
Which takes us back to a podcast, quite a long, what number is this? 325 or something, Claire? Quite a long way back, when you're talking about the motivation always has to come from within, whatever stage you're at. So your joy and your love of what you're doing must be the foundation. And is providing that's a foundation, then the outcome, you stand a better chance of a positive outcome if the foundation is from within.
So in short, you're saying that intrinsic motivation allows us to perform at our best.
Has to be the prof that says that, but yes. Because I started with very much an extrinsic motivation, and the flaws that developed. Music's not about playing fast. I don't know how long you can listen to a flute player playing fast, but it bores me after about a few seconds. You want to hear the depth, the richness. So my motivation was very much showy-offy. Mm. And perhaps the outcome may have been different, perhaps not, if my motivation was very much intrinsic in nature.
Yeah.
So we're very different, aren't we? You're the modest, get on and do it. And that's proved with your background. Mine was almost, I'd say, confidence bordering on a little bit of arrogance. I think, look what I can do. But it's not built on firm foundations. And I think an intrinsic motivation can really build those firm foundations. Yeah.
So you have to think, I think, in terms of turning having to into wanting to. That's really
yes.
That's really the key.
And I don't know I've ever had that wanting to.
That's such a shame.
It is, isn't it? It is. And I think it's because And I think I believe it must be much harder now when you're looking online thinking, I can never do that, I can never play like that. It must be hard to have that intrinsic motivation to think, I don't care about other people, this is about me and what I can do. And I know you, when you were at the academy and you was talking about the auditions, you would see beyond what you could hear. You know, you would see something there that could be developed rather than something that was perhaps not a firm foundation, as a tree with little roots. It was
potential.
Yeah.
You had to look at potential, not necessarily where they had arrived at that point.
Yeah.
And just playing lots of notes is of no use whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, I was once told that I should give up and go and become a road sweeper. So,
well, I'm very glad you didn't.
Yes. Because I'm sat down here on a lovely sunny day with, as I say, the Bridgerton chandelier over my head. How do you clean? And we're going off piste here, but how do you clean a chandelier like that?
With great difficulty.
Do you have to use a duster, or do you get...
You can use a feathered duster, but every now and again you have to take the whole thing down and take each. There's hundreds of pieces there, and you just take them all apart and wash them.
Gosh.
I'm not going to do that. Life's too short.
Oh, it is. And talking about life's too short brings me to... We're going to be taking a pause. A pause? A pause. How long, we don't know at the moment. This is me looking at intrinsic motivation, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And we've done 325, 26. And the first date we started, I had to remind Claire this morning, was March the 5th, 2018. A weekly pod ever since then. And I'm just going to be looking at taking a little sabbatical. Because when you get to my age, you've got to look at how old you are and what you can do, said in a London accent. So I've asked Claire if she minds we just pause for a little while to give me a chance to go and find myself, go and sit on a mountain, blow up the flute balloons, go swimming with dolphins, or whatever it is people do.
But we have a library of works here.
We have a library of valuable work, and say we've done more flute podcasts than anybody else. So the aim in the next period is to find a way that we can make it really easy for people to access the podcast that they'd be interested in without having to scroll down 315, 320 titles. I've put that into AI, Claire, and I've got some ideas. So that is the aim. The aim will be to try and get this resource so it's really easily understandable and accessible. Because we've done all this many, we need it to be even more accessible. And then, when I've rejuvenated my batteries, madam, sounds a bit like a chimney sweep, old Dick Van Dyke, doesn't it?
Yeah. Best to avoid, maybe.
Up the chimneys, my lady. Yeah. When we've got that, then we'll look at regrouping again. And every time I stop stroking.
Yeah. Millie is very demanding. She likes you to stroke her. She'll give a little. She's talking to you.
Oh, is she?
Yeah.
Gosh, most people. Most women talk to me like that. So yes, we'll be taking a little pause whilst I work out how to make all the resources we've got more accessible, probably in a website format. They're very easy search, so it's really, you can search by subject matter, by artist, or by something that's really, really easy. And then we'll regroup and take the intrinsic to the extrinsic again. Because for me, again, podcasting, for you, it's always been intrinsic. You've done it because you've got information you wanted to pass over.
Yeah.
For me, it's extrinsic because I look at the analytics and the numbers. So it's almost, I'm sure you've already got the feeling here that Claire does this for the love of the flute and the love of teaching the flute. And in fact, on the last podcast, she was offering her services as a mentor.
And I still am.
Yes, a free mentor. So if you reach out to Claire if you want mentoring on something, a piece or something, some advice, because Claire is the perfect person for doing that.
And this is a free service, I have to say. It's, you get to a point where you want to, having got so much from the music industry, that it's nice to give something back. And I've spoken to quite a few people now online, helping them with various things, and it's great fun. So if you just need some help with any aspect of your playing or auditions or whatever it might be, practice, get in touch.
Isn't she nice? Oh, it makes me feel so guilty. I don't do anything like that. It's all about me, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all about you, JP.
So from the extrinsic old geezer on this microphone to the wonderfully intrinsic lover of the flute and everything to do with trying to make it more enjoyable for you as a flute player, flute teacher, and really just opening up the magic of the flute. Clare, thanks for joining us for the last 6.5, nearly 7 years.
Yeah, we really appreciate everyone who listened and downloaded or streamed the podcast. It's been wonderful.
So this isn't a farewell adieu. This is just pressing the pause button while I go and try and sort something out.
Yeah, but still, if you want to write in and have any
absolutely.
suggestions, please do.
And if you want to bully Clare to get the podcast back up running sooner, then feel free to do so via flutepodcast@gmail.com and on the web at Talking Flutes on Facebook and Talking Flutes on Instagram, and obviously on our socials at Clare Flute it's not Twitter anymore, it's X. And at Flute on X. And in the meantime, I'm going to continue reposting all the old podcasts. So we're not going dead. It's just I'm going to be taking time out. I'm quite selfish. This is extrinsic, isn't it, again? I wish we'd keep it going. If it was intrinsic motivation, we'd keep going, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Oh, thank you, everything, Clare. And we'll catch up again soon.
Yep, will do. Thanks, Jean-Paul.
And thanks for joining us on Talking Flutes.
Bye for now.
Bye. Talking Flutes and Talking Flutes Extra are podcast productions by the Trevor James Flute Company. For more information, visit trevorjamesflutes.com.